He was one of the first to take to Twitter and Facebook. He was perhaps the first to do live streaming of his speeches on YouTube. In fact, he was the first to do a Google Hangout in India. When people claim that the UPA decade was a lost decade, it is not an understatement. It is a statement of fact. Because no modernization had happened, no grievances were resolved. One of the things that I observed, especially after the 2002 riots, there was a very concerted, biased manner in which the media was out to get him. But after the 2002 riots, before the 2002 December, Gujarat elections, people forget that in between these two, a very big incident happened. The terrorist attack in Akshardham temple and the attack on Akshardham in Gandhinagar did not trigger any riots. In the past, I would think you needed press conferences because you needed to get the government to react on various things. Right? There is no other avenue or platform. Today, on social media, you are on trial every second. So in that sense, Modi as an individual may not be responding, but that entire machinery is responding. Dr. Manmohan Singh's communication abilities were very, very mediocre. He was not a public speaker. He was very uncomfortable. He didn't inspire confidence. There is an element of people also overreacting. They're too sensitive to some of this communication. You can look at the United States, and the politics there is so polarized. There is their prime time is way more polarized than our prime time. There is one thing why all of us got involved in this campaign. That is that one single reason, that he's an achiever who battled his way up from a very humble background. Prime Minister Modi is connecting with the diaspora. He's talking about hope, positivity, the change that's possible. Very visionary way, looking at the future, looking at the present. While if you look at Rahul Gandhi's his entire rhetoric, it is all about hurt and grievance and, the negativity that, this is not happening, that's not happening, India is, democracy is dying. This whole false narrative. I think what has changed with Mr. Modi is he's given the larger diaspora a sense of pride.
Namaste, Jai Hind. Welcome to another edition of ANI Podcast with Smita Prakash. Today we discuss how important it is for a head of state or a head of government to have communication skills. Mr. Narendra Modi, ever since he became the Prime Minister of India, has rewritten the rules about how a head of government communicates with the public. He hasn't held a single press conference since he took office in 2014. He's given several one-on-one interviews to journalists in the past 9 years, and almost every day there is a public speech where he addresses specific issues with target audiences. But his flagship communication outreach is Mann Ki Baat. To talk about this program, we have in our studio author of a book on the same subject. Shashi Shekhar is a technology expert who became part of Team Modi when the BJP picked the Gujarat Chief Minister to be the Prime Minister candidate. He's interacted closely with Mr. Modi and has been part of Team Modi. So, Mr. Shashi Shekhar, thank you so much for being part of the podcast. I'm going to take the liberty of calling you by first name because, if I don't get that on record, that I can call you by first name, I get a lot of...
By all means.
Thank you. Because then otherwise people turn around and say that, you've insulted the guest and all that. So
No,
I'm going to insist that, this is an informal conversation. So we're going to have first name basis.
Sure.
Of course, we'll discuss this book that you have written on collective spirit, concrete action, Mann Ki Baat and its influence on India. But I must say that I've been following you on social media for a long time. When you had that Twitter handle called Off Stumped, and you used to write about everything, not necessarily just politics. You used to tweet on international affairs, on Pakistan, on terrorism, and so much more. And then you gave up all that to become part of Team Modi and part of the campaign to elect Mr. Modi as Prime Minister of India. So we'll go through a gamut of issues, but thank you so much for being part of the podcast. I want to begin, Shashi, by asking you that about Mr. Modi being a communicator. There's a lot of which has been written about that. So let's trace that because we're recording this just before the Prime Minister is going to embark on this very important visit to the US. There's a lot that comes in, in conversations about how he's this excellent communicator. But you have tracked him over the years. You've seen how he used social media before he became Prime Minister and then when he came in 2014. So tell me what was your view when you saw him as Chief Minister and using social media and then later when he became Prime Minister?
I think it's a great question. If you look at Mr. Modi's career, going all the way back to the decades that he was Chief Minister, and I would in fact go even further back to when he was in the party at the BJP as well, you will see that as a communicator, he is not shy of using technology. He's very innovative, and he's constantly looking to establish an emotional connection in any conversation that happens on the stage, in a public setting. If I recall this interview that he had given to Rajiv Shukla way back, even before he was chief minister, and he talks about his passion for technology, how he uses his laptop, browses the internet. So he's very comfortable with technology. And once he became chief minister, of course, the political circumstances of that period were such that the entire media was very hostile to him. He had to find other ways of getting his message across. And I think that is where you see his innovation coming through, where he was able to use technology to disintermediate the traditional media platforms, to directly reach his constituents, directly connect with his audience. He was one of the first to take to Twitter and Facebook. He was perhaps the first to do live streaming of his speeches on YouTube. It was very easy to follow CM Modi on the trail, whether it is campaign or whether doing different public events, because every speech of his would be on YouTube, right? And then he was also not shy of experimenting with really new technologies like 3D, holography to do public rallies. I recall.
This is now you're talking about 2014.
Even before that.
Even before that.
Even before that.
Okay.
In fact, the first 3D rallies were done during the 2012 Gujarat Assembly elections. And even prior to that.
And that was already when he had done 3 terms. As chief minister. So you've got to be innovative, I guess, to get your message across, because people are tired of listening to the same thing, right?
In fact, he was the first to do a Google Hangout in India. And I recall that day. This was hosted by Ajay Devgan. And the YouTube India servers just crashed. So they were like 30-45 minutes behind schedule because they had to get the servers back up and running, because that was such interest. This is 2011, 2012 we're talking about. So clearly he is someone that has looked at technology as a way to innovate, as a way to connect with diversity of audiences. Now you see that once he's become prime minister, the scale has changed. In fact, even during the campaign of 2014, because one thing that was very different in the 2014 election campaign, apart from the use of social media and YouTube and live streaming and so on, there was also digital volunteering. There was this platform that was created, India 272. Where people from all walks of life, people who would traditionally not appear at a public rally or step into a party office, got involved in the campaign. They were able to engage with the campaign digitally. And that digital volunteer platform then became MyGov once he became prime minister. So the scale changed. Now it was about engaging citizens, making them stakeholders within whatever developmental mission that he had. And then comes Mann Ki Baat and traditional broadcasting, because the thought process is still the same, just that you went back to an older technology because now you wanted to change the reach. Now you're talking of reach at a billion scale, right? And that's where radio comes in, and then you see this pattern of innovation continuing with the Modi app, with newer forms of social media. The other thing about him as a communicator, I think he's a masterclass in terms of communication, because if you look at every one of his speeches, there will always be an element which is very personal, emotive, that connects with the audience. In fact, I saw this during the 2013-2014 campaign period. He would be traveling to different parts of the country, and every speech of his would start with a few sentences in the local language. He would talk about some local poet, a local shrine, and a local hero. So instantly that emotional connection is established. And you see the same method even in Mann Ki Baat, where across episodes, he's talking of local heroes, local personalities, different parts of India, making connections that we otherwise will not, make. And I think that is what makes his method of communication very effective, because people are instantly able to relate to him, connect with him emotionally.
So, would you say that, like they say, necessity, mother of invention, would you say that the reason why he took to technology and innovative means of communication is because of what you said was the hostile media? So, for those of us, for those who are listening in, youngsters who don't remember what Mr. Modi faced as far as the media is concerned, what happened in Gujarat. I mean, many people know about Gujarat post Godra and things like that. What happened then, do you think, that, that did Narendra Modi go into a shell? Was that hostility from the media is because he saw them as a factor which was against him and wanted him toppled? Was he justified in that hostility, that relationship which went sour?
I think it's a very interesting question, because one has to understand, what exactly happened back then. In fact, my own personal discovery of Modi goes back to that period.
Yeah.
Because I was in the US, I used to blog. I was politically aware that way. And one of the things that I observed, especially after the 2002 riots, there was a very concerted, biased manner in which the media was out to get him. And this was not based always on facts. In fact, I remember the series of analytical articles in the Hindu by then Siddharth Vardarajan, where he was talking about what happened in the Godhra incident and then what happened in the riots. And you see so many contradictions. And there's a very elaborate set of articles. And on the face of it, the average reader will take it at face value. They would not, get into the depths. But then once it became obvious to me that there were so many contradictions in this narrative that was being created. In fact, that kind of triggered my whole blogging saga back then. And so
off-stumped. If people don't know about it, some of us who have been tracking you since then, we remember reading about all this. Yes.
Right. Yeah. So clearly he was having this very antagonistic, relationship with the media, and it was not helping. And one incident that stands out to me in my mind in this entire narrative that was created around 2002, and how they've tried to portray him and paint him in a certain manner. That after the 2002 riots, before the 2002 December, Gujarat elections, which he is famously, reviled for that, he was very aggressive and, it's a communalized, polarized election and so on. People forget that in between these two, a very big incident happened. The terrorist attack in Akshardham temple, where several people died. The terrorists were, of course, hunted down eventually. And the attack on Akshardham in Gandhinagar did not trigger any riots. There were no incidents of violence. In fact, Mr. Modi went on Doordarshan at that time and appealed for calm, and that had an impact. Now, this doesn't come anywhere in the narrative. People just jump from February 2002 all the way to December 2002. People forget that September, such a major event occurs, and then it was uneventful. Nothing happened. So that kind of tells you how hostile the media was against him. And hence it became very important for him to find other avenues of communicating, and which is where social media comes in, which also is where bloggers like myself got discovered, because we were trying to counter the sort of narrative that was being put out in the newspapers, be it the Hindu, be it Aaj Tak doing its famous infamous sting back then, Tehelka and so on. So you had bloggers on one side, you had social media, and then of course you had live streaming. Now, was he right? Was it justified? Well, I mean, it was the situation the way it was, and he had to find innovative ways of persisting, and he was so committed to his cause, because other politicians could have just given in, which he didn't. He was, I think, so committed to his cause that he found other ways. But does that reduce his use of technology only to this aspect? No, I would not agree with that. Because I think if you go back to his organizing days, he has always been about engaging volunteers, engaging at the grassroots. And you will see this, going way back to one of his first elections, the Ahmedabad municipal elections, where I recall him describing how he went about engaging with households. He would go in the afternoons, engage with housewives, get them involved in this municipal campaign. And that was perhaps one of the first times that the BJP won the municipal elections in Ahmedabad. And he talked about how he used Vaishnav Jan in a very interesting way to engage with them. So again, you see that same method of grassroots engagement, using cultural symbols, making an emotional connect. Technology is, of course, a force multiplier, and which is what you see in the later years.
When you were talking about initially, you said a whole bunch of these technocrats or people who were in tech field who joined in the campaign in 2014. Right. Who became interested and at that time, I was, as a media person, sitting outside. And the buzz at that time was that how does he expect to win not cultivating traditional media, not using people who know the media, like the big wigs of the media, right. The big anchors and the big names of media. I'll leave you to name them, not me. So he was talking, and then he was not just not engaging with them, he was also using terms like news traders
Right.
for them, right? And very politely referring to them while giving interviews to journalists from those media organizations. So it was like he wasn't shying away from calling names.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So,
And-
and then using these newfound people who came in from Singapore, US, everybody to be part of that election.
Right.
So, how did he get about doing that at that stage, and how come he was so sure that he was going to use these people who were the newbies and still win the communication battle?
See, there was a process of change. If you see, 2004, technology was too early. Not much of technology played a role. But 2009 was the first time blogging made an appearance in the political trail. You had bloggers for Advani. You had friends of BJP.org, which was created by Rajesh Jain. So all online initiatives. So already you saw the seeds in the 2009 election. Of course, that was not the right election for all of this to make a difference, but there was a beginning. It just started. What we forget after what happened after 2009, the Radia tapes. I think the Radia tapes went a long way in undermining or demolishing the credibility of the so-called traditional media bigwigs, people who monopolized prime time. I recall when the no confidence, when there was the votes, note for votes scam, and the confidence vote in Parliament. I recall watching how the primetime anchors got excited when the votes were tallied in the Lok Sabha. It just made it so apparent that there was no semblance of neutrality. They were completely biased, and then you had this whole Radia tape incident, and which kind of confirmed what everyone all along suspected with what was going on with media in Delhi, and so that helped them immensely, because it's not enough to just use technology. It's not just enough to bring in a whole set of new faces to engage with people, but more importantly, you had this environment where the traditional media stood discredited. I think that made a huge difference, and hence by 2013, when you had social media had already gained traction, Twitter, especially after the 2008 terrorist attacks, Twitter kind of became popular in India. It just grew, leaps and bounds. YouTube live streaming took off. So all of these came together. I think that's what made the difference.
I'm going to come to neutrality and of the media, because now it's the other way around, because people say that there is no neutrality at all. It's like जो भी कुर्सी पे बैठा है उसको सलाम. So there is no neutrality as far as media is concerned, because it's now shifted its loyalties towards the BJP and Mr. Narendra Modi, and that was apparent in the way, elections. We just saw the Karnataka elections. That's what everybody is saying. But I'll come to that later. In 2013 and 2014, what captured the imagination of the people as far as communication is concerned? How did Mr. Modi suddenly, spring on the scene as the perfect candidate for Prime Minister, and not say a Sushma Swaraj,
Right.
who at that time was like, everybody thought that, okay, she's the natural heir. But here comes this Mr. Modi, who people don't know about. He's considered a regional leader, but the communication skills of that team Modi was so great that suddenly Sushma Swaraj was out of the scene and it was Mr. Modi.
Well, I don't think it was that sudden. In fact, let me rewind a little back further, because I recall writing about this in my blog as well. 2006, I recall when Pramod Mahajan, unfortunately, because everyone thought he was the natural heir at that time. And then, unfortunately, this incident happens and he passes away. And I remember writing in my blog that this just, opens an avenue for Narendra Modi. And I think even Shekhar Gupta at some point wrote something similar in his Indian Express column. Around that same time frame, I recall.
I remember having a Twitter exchange with you at that time. I was like, how are you saying that?
Right.
There are so many others and stuff.
The reason being, in fact, this goes back to your question, what was so different? He spoke a different language.
Okay.
A language that you didn't hear an Arun Jaitley or a Sushma Swaraj or anyone talk. And a language that was appealing to my generation, because if you recall, my generation came out of was the product of the 80s and 90s. We came out of that uncertainty of the Mandal period, the Ram Janmabhoomi agitation, coalition governments which were unstable. The rupee got devalued. Gulf War, so much of uncertainty.
Right.
And then when we came out of college and we entered the job market, that is when things started changing. The whole IT boom just about started. And I recall, late 90s, when the IT boom was, just India was being talked about, there was so much of promise. You felt that you were making history. You felt that you were making a difference. Now, that generation felt quite let down once the Vajpayee government was voted out and the UPA government came in, and the whole rhetoric, the narrative of governance was very, very different. It was not aligned with that aspirational generation. And then here you have Mr. Modi, who's talking very different things. He's talking about minimum government. He's talking about getting the government out of business. He's talking about technology, innovation, entrepreneurship. Now that is something this generation was, very easily relate to. I recall he had gone to China as a chief minister, and when he came back, there was a speech in Business Standard carried it. I mean, that was the first time I heard an Indian politician talking about minimum government, maximum governance. And that is something that then you see, makes its appearance in his speeches quite consistently. In fact, I recall 2012 Gujarat elections. There were multiple phases of voting. And I think in between one of those phases, he wrote a blog which appeared in the Times of India, where again he talked about, this whole philosophy of minimum government. So you see entrepreneurship, a limited role for government, was a new rhetoric that was unheard of anywhere in the political landscape, and it appealed to this generation. Hence, this generation got involved, in the digital campaigning of 2013, 2014.
You spoke about as a young techie being kind of disappointed with the narrative of that time and what was happening. I don't mean to be pejorative when I say techie, but you know what I mean. Those who were in their late 20s or early 30s at that time. Where did you feel that, why were you disappointed in, say, a Dr. Manmohan Singh at that time? I'm going to keep coming back to communication skills because that's what the book is all about Mann Ki Baat. So there was economic reforms happening. India was, the second generation reforms, if you want to call them. The nuclear deal had been signed with America. India was opening up. Do you think to a large extent there was that Dr. Manmohan Singh could not carry the narrative? He was seen as a weak or accidental prime minister. He himself talks about that.
Right.
Was that to a large extent responsible for Mr. Modi's rise as a communicator?
In a way, because, as a young techie, I was in the US at that time. And I recall being part of, a whole movement there to create, favorable conditions for the nuclear deal. We all, wrote letters to the local congressmen. It was a moment of, it didn't matter that it was a Congress government or whoever was the government. It was a big thing for India that the nuclear deal would, happen. So in that sense, all of us, related to that moment with Dr. Manmohan Singh. But then it became very apparent that there was a basic fundamental contradiction between Dr. Manmohan Singh as the Prime Minister and Sonia Gandhi and the National Advisory Council and their entire agenda, be it NCERT textbooks, be it... In fact, nobody talks about what they did to NCERT textbooks. Even you see every day today, articles on NCERT textbooks. Be it, this entire agenda around, rights, be it forest rights, in the name of rights, they created, this entire culture of entitlement, which I think was completely running counter to the kind of aspirational change that many of us wanted in India. And of course, Dr. Manmohan Singh's communication abilities were very, very mediocre, let's put it that way. He was not a public speaker. He was very uncomfortable. He didn't inspire confidence. So clearly that was also playing, and then of course what happened with the 2G scam and, the Radia tapes, all of that I think added up to create the perfect set of conditions for a Modi to rise.
I guess a political leadership understanding that a prime minister cannot be just an administrator, needs to be a communicator too. And not just a communicator, needs to be a good administrator too. Somewhere was there in 2014, did that come together in a Mr. Modi?
Bilkul. I think you can see that, in fact, even in the book I mentioned this, Dr.
Yeah.
Parmeshwar Nair brings up this point that Mr. Modi plays that role, not just as chief executive, but also as communicator in chief. I think, as you rightly pointed out, it's two roles. You have to, lead the administration, and you also have to communicate what you're doing. And I think he's been very effective at doing both of those.
So this book also is that, it's like, what is the need to write a book on Mann Ki Baat? He's already spoken that. But there's always, that saying, Jangal nacha mor kisne dekha? If a peacock is dancing in the forest, nobody really knows. Unless it's now being videoed and put on Twitter and on Instagram. So you can't be a shrinking violet anymore. You can't just be a doer of things. You need to tell the world, you need to tell your people that this is what it has been achieved. Now the BJP takes that to a whole different level. And that's the criticism that many people who don't have their sympathies with the BJP say, that it's a too much of talk, too much of boasting about your achievements. Can you just pipe down a bit? Is that valid, that criticism?
Yes and no. When I talk about him being the communicator in chief, there is one aspect which is, I think, very distinctive. He's perhaps India's first, not just the Prime Minister, but also as a politician who thinks digital first. I think that's very important. That today's communication world, it's not just about broadcast or print. You have to think digital first. Your first statement on an incident is 140 characters on Twitter. Your first reaction to something is an image on Instagram or a live stream on YouTube and so on. So that digital first, I think, is a very distinctive aspect about his communication, and which also relates to what you're just now talking about. Why is the BJP so, do they go overboard, or are they over communicating? Is there, such a glut of communication that's happening? I think it has to do with the fact that in this digital era, where attention spans are so small, where there's just so much of overload of information, so many things that are crowding up your timelines, your WhatsApp groups, and so on. For you to get your message through, you have to over communicate, because in the hope that out of those 10 things that you create, maybe one will get noticed. And I think that's the reality. We are seeing that. Forget politics. In the media business, you run a media company, I've run a media company as well. And you see the analytics, the data, the attention spans are so small. It is so hard. Unless, it's a phenomenally controversial subject, you just can't get attention of audiences. And the audiences are fragmented across, a wide variety of topics. So that is perhaps the reason why.
So you flood the audience, jo lena hai le lo usme se.
Because something will, stick out, something will stand out. Also, I think there is an element of people also overreacting. That they're too sensitive to some of this communication. We can look at the United States, when the politics there is so polarized. There is their prime time is way more polarized than our prime time. We don't even compare there. I used to listen to talk radio in the US when I was there, and you have people. Now he's no more, Rush Limbaugh and so on, Sean Hannity and all these guys. They were so polarized. The manner they would describe Hillary Clinton,
language,
the names they would call her.
Yeah. We are still hesitant in our radio and television broadcast to use abusive language, whereas Rush Limbaugh and all, they were like very. I've heard
compared to what goes on in the US, which is one of the world's largest democracies after India, I think we are quite tame and mild. I think our thinking elite tend to overreact a lot. I don't think that's
about the information glut. I don't know the exact word to use, because you've been CEO of Prasar Bharati. We'll talk about that hat that you wore, but it's also that things change, and I just feel that we left Europe behind years ago. We've talked about America. Let's talk about Europe. I'll give you this one instance that I was covering Dr. Manmohan Singh's visit to Germany, and there was this one press interaction where Ms. Merkel spoke in German language, and response to a journalist. Then all the German journalists moved away, and we were the Indian team. We didn't know what she had said in response to the question. So we went to their official people from their thing, and from their Ministry of External Affairs, their foreign ministry, and said, can we get a translation? So they said, no, because that is her office which will give the translation. I said, okay, then can you direct me? So spoke to that person. Where is the translation? We need to put it out for our print and our television. What did she say? Where is the translation? Because there's no direct translation. Nobody had direct translation. Imagine. So, when is that going to happen? Today's Saturday evening, so by Monday you'll get it. This is something that we left behind maybe 20 years ago in India. Simultaneous translation happens. The script is given to you what the foreign dignitary has spoken. So he said, we're going to be boarding the flight to India. Who's going to do it? Can you ask the German embassy in India to translate for you? The German embassy is closed because it's a Sunday. So this is what I'm trying to say to you, is that how Europe got left behind 10, 12 years ago, where we were at loss. So he said, now we will be reporting on just what the Indian Prime Minister said. Your Prime Minister won't get reported at all. They couldn't be bothered. They're not bothered what your foreign media writes. Now, compare this with how Narendra Modi's media coverage is. Before the Prime Minister goes, there's already one potha of information which is given to you about the earlier visits of Mr. Modi to that nation. It's given to you so that when you go on air, I'm talking about the TV channels, they already have this information. They don't need to Google it.
Right.
They have that information. What is the Prime Minister's agenda? So even those regional channels which cannot afford to send a reporter to a foreign visit has that information with them. So it's great that the team of Mr. Modi is providing this information. How did Mr. Modi get this team together? You tell me, because you're part of Team Modi. You didn't expect me to come there, I'm sure.
Well, just to set the record, I'm part of Team Extended Modi, not Team Modi.
Right.
So.
There are these concentric circles.
Concentric circles, right. So I think it has evolved over the years. When you go back to when he was Chief Minister, the digital operation that was managing his social media presence, his live streaming and so on. Then it grows into India 272, then MyGov. And then once he's Prime Minister, you got this Modi app, which has become now the focal point of a lot of the communication. And then what is striking is the multilingual manner in which it communicates, be it the short videos, be it the speeches. I mean, take Mann Ki Baat itself, right? We do it in 40 plus languages.
Yeah.
11 foreign languages. And it's all done within that 24-hour time frame. It's not like, wait for next Monday when the translator comes back to the office, right? So this machinery has grown over
That
time.
is like phenomenal, right? Because you're working with radio, government, I don't mean to be rude, but it is slothful compared to the private sector.
Yeah.
So to
be able to get that, a sleeping machinery to deliver at this pace in so many languages, flawlessly, without mistakes, I think it's amazing what has happened. So it's the message discipline.
So what about the Team Modi thing, the team, that 272 and all those things that happened? Who were these people who got together and said, yes, we will give up our day jobs, give up whatever job, and these were good jobs that you yourself gave up a fabulous career in America. You could have had a comfortable suburban life in America.
Correct.
You give up and you come back to the country. I know of several people who did that. What was that motivation to become part of Team Modi in 2014, 2019 and now?
Well, 2014 I can talk more authoritatively because I think all of us were part of that phenomenon. It was about, it's now or never, right? It's about making the change happen. The change is not going to happen by itself. So we all, and then you had a leader who was talking your language. He was giving a vision that all of us could relate to, and all of us were aspiring for that. This is the kind of change that we want to see in India. And that was the motivation that got everyone involved. And technology lowered the barrier, because expecting these guys to go to the party office, meet someone there and get involved, impossible, right? But the moment you made it digital, it just lowered the barriers for people to get engaged, because then you didn't have all those traditional apprehensions about do I want to get involved in politics, right? Because traditionally politics in India had a certain kind of an image. So that barrier just went away. And then that just made it easier for all of these people to get involved.
And there were no Nepo kids involved. There was some investment banker, some tech.
That is the most important thing. In fact, if there is one thing why all of us got involved in this campaign, why we related to Mr. Modi, and even today we don't relate to the Congress, that is that one single reason, that he is an achiever who battled his way up, literally from the dumps all the way up. from a very humble background. Because that is the story of all of us, right? We all came from very average families and we worked our way up in life. And here is someone who's, willing to, now do this at a mass scale. I think that is what motivated everyone.
If we go into 2014, which you were saying, at that time you had these newcomers who came in, technocrats, investment bankers, various people from different walks of life who came in and became part of that 2014 campaign. At that time, covering it from a media angle, usually when the earlier elections, अच्छा ये कौन है, हाँ ये ना वो राजस्थान में MLA उसका बेटा है, वो he's working on this campaign for Kamal Nath ji, he's working on with Gehlot ji. So everybody had a connection. Here the only people who had, maybe some of them had the connection, was his uncle was in the RSS. That was it.
Right.
That was the only connection. Otherwise, some of them weren't even that.
Correct.
Right? Now, so here was the media trying to say that, okay, how do I get an interview from this person, because I have no channel. There was a completely new set of
Correct.
people who were working with Mr. Modi and Mr. Shah and everybody else. So quintessential outsider who comes in with a new set of people in 2014, new set of tools to manage the media, puts everybody in a quandary as to how do we communicate with this government now? How do we communicate with this new set of leaders who are not going to give you information, news, interviews just because they are somebody's children and somebody's connection. So this Team Modi of 2014 rewrote the rules in New Delhi.
Yeah, and I think the finest example of that is the death of the gossip column. Because today the gossip column, Indian Express has this, I'm forgetting what it's called.
Confidential.
It's laughable. There's nothing confidential there.
It's become smaller and smaller.
And so the gossip columns have just died because there is no gossip. Nobody's planting these stories.
So how do you see Mr. Modi's communication skills if you were to compare it with prime ministers of the past, especially Mr. Vajpayee? Because there's a lot that they talk about. You were talking about how Mr. Modi has this emotional connect with the people. Right. So did Mr. Vajpayee, but in a different way. He had that oratorial skills, which was compared to Mr. Nehru at one point of time. How do you compare Mr. Modi? It'd be unfair to compare Mr. Modi's skills with, say, Dr. Manmohan Singh. Right. But if you were to compare it with Mr. Vajpayee, where would you put them?
Good question, because when we digitized the archives at Prasar Bharati, one of the things that we were able to do was pull out all these old speeches, all the prime ministerial speeches, different periods, including emergency. We got some real footages from emergency, then Indira Gandhi speeches from the 80s. So I did listen to some of these speeches over a period of time. And as you rightly pointed out, of course, Mr. Vajpayee had this literary rhetorical flourish in his speeches, which is a different genre of communication by itself.
A poet.
It's very poetic, very lyrical, right? And it's very uplifting. But then he and Mr. Modi share that emotional connect. I recall I was here in Delhi when the 13-day Vajpayee government fell. And that was the first time I think he took a decision that the speech will be shown live, the confidence motion will be shown live on Doordarshan. And we got to see him speak that day. And in fact, that clip even now does the rounds with Pramod Mahajan, sitting right behind him there.
Yeah.
And I recall that speech, the way he delivered it, that emotional, loaded with emotion. You just felt sorry for what was happening. And I could see it in the faces of everyone watching that speech that day. So that is one thing that both Mr. Modi and Mr. Vajpayee share. But the other leaders were not of the television era. They were, of course, Doordarshan was there, but it's not the kind of television era that we are talking about now. Be it Indira Gandhi, be it Rajiv Gandhi, and so on. Mr. Nehru would be again comparable in terms of the rhetorical, also very intellectual arguments in his speeches. But then you see, when I listen to Nehru's speeches, late 50s, early 60s, you can see that age has started catching up with him. His speeches were getting boring,
and also
more longer.
The China debacle. That delivered such a body blow on Pandit Nehru that his you can see a discerning divide in the impact that he had.
Absolutely.
And he just lost that mojo.
In fact,
if you were to say.
so we found 2 television interviews of his by, I forget, Michaelis Arnold, I think, an American TV journalist. One was 1958. The other was just a few days before, I think a week or 10 days before he passed away. His last television interview. And you can actually see this, the effect of the China thing, because he's more philosophical, very introverted. You could make out of this.
So in one of them, I don't recall which interview it was of Pandit Nehru. It was just, I think, a couple of weeks before he passed away. The founder of ANI, he was filming that interview, and the camera, the batteries had to be changed, and it was late night shoot. And he said, I want to give this, it wasn't an interview, I think it was more of an address or something like that. And the batteries were being changed and the lights had to be changed because the light battery would also burst otherwise. So because they were hot lights, it had to be changed. And Pandit Nehru fell asleep. He just went like that. Maybe low blood pressure or whatever.
Right.
He just fell asleep like that, and he had to be shaken away because losing a war is something which is, like you said about this emotional speech that Prime Minister Vajpayee did. Losing a war is something that I don't think prime ministers can get over that, and I don't think Pandit Nehru
He didn't get over it.
He didn't get over it, and it was perfidy. I mean, it was like China betrayed.
Right.
He trusted China. So I think to a large extent, communication also, there's a lot of emotion that goes with it.
Absolutely. In fact, you see a similar change in Indira Gandhi's speeches. Younger Indira Gandhi, late 60s, very different. In
That
fact,
fire and brimstone.
fire. In fact, she's, she in her speeches, she ends it with Bharat Mata Ki Jai. I mean, imagine a Congress Prime Minister today saying Bharat Mata Ki Jai.
Yeah.
Indira Gandhi says that in her Independence Day speech. Then you have the emergency era speeches of Indira Gandhi, and you can see that she's angry.
There's a
lot of
bitterness.
Bitterness, a lot of anger, a lot of bitterness. Then something happens in 1980s. I think it's perhaps Sanjay Gandhi's passing away, because the speeches from, especially we have a whole bunch of her campaign speeches, 1980 to 1984. She is distracted. She is irritable. She is not communicating. She's just rambling. And you can make that difference.
There's a fidgety thing that I noticed when you see the speeches. When when I was doing my research, when you see she keeps pulling her pallu on her head continuously. Right. She has that blink that comes in that. In fact, there is a speech, there is an interview with Maneka Gandhi who said that she never was the same person again.
She's not. Clearly, you can make out, because she's making mistakes. People are trying to correct her. You can. It's all in the audio, so it's quite obvious.
Yeah.
That way, I think Rajiv Gandhi's speech is perhaps unremarkable. Even nothing much to talk about there.
But then Rajiv Gandhi, he could do no wrong in that first couple of years. Right. And then things unraveled for him. Chandrasekhar I feel Chandrasekhar had a phenomenal connect also, and quite underrated as a public speaker. I think
without a doubt.
Yeah. Even though it was just Hindi, right. He had a good... Then there was Deve Gowda, who said that because I don't know Hindi, I can't be, they will not accept me as Prime Minister. And he wanted to learn Hindi with that.
But then we forget Narasimha Rao.
Narasimha Rao.
He is again a very, very clever communicator. In fact, his speeches, we had digitized his speeches where he talks about the need for economic reform. And he makes a very, very compelling argument. Of course, he is a scholarly Prime Minister again. Right, and he's not a people's prime minister.
Polyglot, knew so many languages, but spoke only English and Hindi, even though he was so fluent in Marathi also. I have heard him speak Marathi. You wouldn't know that he's not a Maharashtrian. He spoke so fluently. Telugu, of course, he knew very well. He knew Spanish, and he knew so many languages. But again, was not very communicative in press conferences. He was in fact snapping. Now let's come to the question on why do you think Prime Minister Modi, what is your view about him not holding press conferences?
Well, I think the digital era has kind of made the press conference redundant, right? if in the past, I would think you needed press conferences because you needed to get the government to react on various things. Right? There was no other avenue or platform for you to get that, unless of course you were in parliament or in such a setting. Today, on social media, you are on trial every second. Like you said, BJP over communicates. It is over communicating because it's also reacting to questions that are coming up all the time, right? And this fact check has to be done. That has to be clarified. So in that sense, Modi as an individual may not be responding, but that entire machinery is responding 24/7. So in that sense, I don't see a need for the same way in which press conferences were needed in the past. So I think that was primarily to a large extent contributing to that. But he's also held press interactions, right? It's not that he's not done press interactions at all. Perhaps what people want, and I think this is what the Delhi media elite perhaps want, or even the opposition. To them, it is, unless it is adversarial, it is not valid. I mean, I think that's a very negative way of looking at the role of media, because unless you're adversarial, unless you ask uncomfortable questions for the sake of asking uncomfortable questions, I don't agree with that philosophy. Because the government is being put on trial every day. It's not that negative op-eds have stopped. It's not that difficult columns are not being written. It's not that questions are not being asked. They're asked. In fact, the parliamentary questions are quite uncomfortable. I mean, I've been on the other side trying to reply to those parliamentary questions. I know how taxing the entire session can be, because people ask very pointed questions, and those questions have to be answered. Because if you don't answer it correctly, you're in trouble. And you answer it in a certain way where you make a commitment, then it becomes an obligation on Parliament, and then they track it for to death till it is fulfilled. It becomes an assurance. So the government is on trial all the time. It is just that the manner in which the media elite feel satisfied that unless it was an adversarial a gladiatorial interaction with the Prime Minister, it doesn't count.
But gladiatorial interaction is the one-on-one interviews which are held. In a press conference, how can it be gladiatorial?
Well, it depends. I mean, I've seen press conferences where people ask very hostile questions, and it can get go the other way as well.
But that's why the Congress says that, look at Rahul Gandhi. He takes all the hostile questions. He's such a brave guy.
But then he also, I remember the recent press conference where he started calling the journalists names, and so I don't think any side comes out looking better on this count. To me, I don't think it matters as much, because as far as putting the government on the dock, asking the hard questions, getting responses, it is happening 24/7, and I think. Nobody can make the argument that the government is not answering uncomfortable questions. I think it's happening all the time.
To come back to that thing about this, people who gave up their jobs and became part of Team Modi, where he brought in his own people. You also gave up your job. You also became here. In America, I'm bringing America again because this is going to air just before Prime Minister Modi's visit to the US. In America, there's a lot that used to be said about draining the swamp. And it used to be said that that's what Trump will do when he comes. He's going to bring his own team. But what ultimately happens is that they become part of the elite in Delhi. So there are many people who say, "Arey, Khan Market gang, to ab ye log naye wala Khan Market gang hai." They take to the elite of Delhi very easily. They adopt the ways of Delhi very easily. They become part of the establishment. Do you think that Mr. Modi's team also?
Not really, no. Okay. I don't think it's the same thing at all. Because most of these people have gone back to doing, various things. It's not that they become permanent fixtures in Delhi. Like my term ended, I left office. There are several others I know who have gone back to the private sector, are doing their thing in different ways. They continue to be involved in social initiatives and perhaps campaign initiatives, but it's not the same thing. I don't think a new set of elite have taken root in that sense. However, going back to your earlier question about press conferences, I just wanted to add one point there. I think in his mind, the purpose is a little bigger. It's much larger. In fact, when you look at Mann Ki Baat as well, and you look at most of his speeches, right? It's really a question of, are you focused on the glass being half full or half empty? The adversarial school of thought of media is all about focusing on half empty. This is not working. That is not there. this grievance, that misery. All the focus, all the debate is on that. And that is what, think of a press conference where you're only discussing about the glass being half full. I don't think it'd be a very interesting press conference, right?
Yeah.
So in his mind, it is about 24/7. The media is anyway going to focus on negative things. Let me put my energy on positive things. Let me, talk about positivity, because that is the only way I can motivate people to get involved in the developmental change. And you see that with Mann Ki Baat, you see that with his other initiatives.
Right. For those of you who don't know about Mann Ki Baat, who live abroad, here's a short primer. Mann Ki Baat is a monthly radio program by Prime Minister Modi where he addresses the people of the country. And the one-way communication is Mr. Modi's speaking about various government initiatives and the demystification of government policies and programs. So, Shashi, you've written this book. It's very interesting. So I haven't heard all episodes of Mann Ki Baat. So I enjoyed reading this, and also the linkages that you brought in, when you talk about it being a kind of a mirror about the diversities of India. So many things we didn't know about, people who've achieved things which come out here. So it's come out in this, when the 100 episodes of Mann Ki Baat is over. And in this book, you say that communication is a metaphor for the diversity of India. Can you just expand a little bit for those who haven't read the book and should read the book?
So, when we look at India, right, again, this is true of Western media. The narrative that the Western media or the global media is largely influenced by is the narrative of what the media talks about in Delhi. What they miss out is that, India is not Delhi. India is far more diverse, both geographically, linguistically, culturally, with very wide socio-economic disparities. So there's no, if you have to understand India, you have to understand its length and breadth. You have to understand this complexity, this diversity. And I think Mann Ki Baat as a platform, as a communication platform, is a very good metaphor for understanding all of that. Because when he talks about various issues, be it cleanliness, be it water conservation, be it going cashless with digital, when he talks of startups, he's not talking about Bangalore alone, he's not talking about Pune alone. In fact, on the back cover of the book, there is this young lady entrepreneur from Manipur who has done interesting products using lotus stem. So he talks about her. In fact, she featured even in the 100th episode where he conversed with her. What was the impact of Mann Ki Baat on your work? So you're talking of people and their life-changing stories from across India that have made an appearance on Mann Ki Baat. Then he talks of various languages. He talks about different cultural, festivals, traditions. And then he links them to the change initiative, the big change initiatives that he's been championing, be it on the cleanliness side, be it on the water conservation side, going plastics free and so on. What he has clearly figured out is that mass scale, at a scale of 1 billion, behavioral change cannot happen through diktat. It can't be the China way. We can't just, just roll out initiatives and expect that, people will just take to them. It can't just happen with government schemes. It can't just happen with communication. It requires people's participation at the grassroots level. And the only way that will happen is when there are grassroots level change agents who make this their own mission. Then they inspire others. So it creates that multiplier effect. And I think that is what you see with Mann Ki Baat, that it is able to communicate to this diversity across India, where be it a handicapped person in Kerala, he feels as strongly about Swachhta and cleanliness as the Prime Minister sitting in Delhi. I think that is just amazing.
You speak about the spirit of inclusion. It comes several times in the book where the Prime Minister speaks about it, and you're linking in the book this that the spirit of inclusion. But the critics who write about Mann Ki Baat and who of course they criticize it being always his own experiences, but it's not that. It's the stories of India. It's not the Prime Minister just narrating it, but these are stories about India. But the spirit of inclusion and the spirit of diversity that you are bringing in the book too, the criticism also is that BJP as a party and the government of Mr. Modi, they don't appreciate diversity and they don't appreciate the spirit of inclusion that they talk about. they want that one size fits all. Just for an example is Hindi. South Indians feel that they are ramming Hindi down the throat, or else cultural aspect too. What do you have to say to that?
I think Mann Ki Baat demolishes that quite convincingly. When you look at, in fact, I have a whole chapter on languages where I talk about how he has championed Tamil. The sheer number of Tamil poets, Tamil iconic personalities that have made an appearance in Mann Ki Baat, I mean, it's just mind-blowing. Then he talks about how Subramanya Bharati wrote a poem in Tamil describing Sister Nivedita and her work. And Sister Nivedita sponsors and boosts Jagdish Chandra Bose's scientific research. So making these connections, right? This is not one size fit all. It's basically finding the threads of commonness across this diversity of India, and you see that with Mann Ki Baat, especially with South India, where this rhetoric is.
Sengol comes after the 100th episode. So
I'm not even talking about
not
Sengol.
Even talking about
not even
Sengol.
talking about Sengol. Without even going there, just look at the number of people who have taken inspiration from his initiatives and have actually done work on the ground in South India. Rajappan, he is completely paralyzed waist down. He cannot stand. He crawls. He has taken it upon himself to go to these lakes near his house and remove plastics, purely because he was inspired by Swachh
millets,
Bharat.
Which you write about.
Millets.
Millets.
Then you have this bus conductor in Tamil Nadu who distributes saplings. So people have found various ways of engaging with his initiatives, becoming change agents within their community. And this is not happening because all of them got converted to Hindi and took to these initiatives. They all related to this common themes culturally, because India has a lot of cultural community across its diversity, and it is that thread that connects him with these various change agents, various communities, which has made this possible. So I don't quite agree with this view that they don't understand diversity, or their conception of diversity is different. What my problem with the way diversity has been articulated, it is all about grievance. It is located in hurt, in grievances. It is that I am different, I have been deprived of something. It's always that negative way of looking at it. His diversity, his approach to diversity is the positive way of looking at it, that we may be different, but here are things that we share in common. Let us find common ground. Let us actually do something.
Right.
So I think that is the fundamental difference. In fact, if you draw a line today in Indian politics, what is the fundamental defining fault line? Here is Mr. Modi trying to argue that the glass is half full, and we need to look for common threads across this diversity, not focus on hurt, not focus only on grievance, but look at the positivity, look at what change is possible. While the other side is all about the glass is half empty, here are our divisions, here is how we are different, here is our grievance, here is our hurt.
These are the fissures. Yeah. Okay. So the foreword for the book is written by Dr. Jaishankar, External Affairs Minister. In the book, now tell me how foreign policy is important, and especially because, as I said, this will be aired just before Prime Minister Modi's visit to the US. His communication with the diaspora, the impact of that, and foreign policy and Mann Ki Baat, both these points.
And foreign policy and Mann Ki Baat, I think very early on, it makes an appearance, right? You're pretty much in the fourth episode of Mann Ki Baat, January of 2015, President Obama does a joint address with Prime Minister taking on questions. So I think it started off on that very high note.
POTUS and Lotus, I remember that whole talk at that time. Yeah.
Right. So, and then over the years, across episodes, you see not only the diaspora making an appearance, because of course he's talking about people of Indian origin in different countries doing different things, either there or coming to India and doing stuff. For example, he talks about this Maharashtrian couple who live in New Jersey, who have popularized Malkham in the US. He talks about these brothers from
Malkham
is a traditional Indian sport. Then he talks about these brothers from Nagpur who participated in a rally in the US to create awareness around tribal issues. So diaspora is a very constant factor, but he's gone beyond that. He has talked about not just people other than those of Indian origin who have become ambassadors sort of for Indian soft power, be it yoga, be it Sanskrit, be it Ayurveda, he gives multiple examples. For example, he talks about khadi in Mexico. There is this gentleman who's popularizing khadi in Mexico. He talks about this lady in the US who is, written a beautiful book on Krishna and Bhagavad Gita and so on. He talks about how Sanskrit is being popularized in Latin America. But what is most interesting is this former African leader, his daughter, comes to India to get treated in a Kerala Ayurvedic center for her eye condition. Now, this gets coverage in the local media in Africa. And this gentleman then in the upcoming elections in his country talks about, I want to bring Indian traditional medicine to Africa so that more people can benefit. Now, that is a very tangible measure of the impact of soft power. And you see all of this on Mann Ki Baat. So in that sense, it has become a platform for advancing India's soft power through these various avenues, from yoga to Ayush to Sanskrit and traditional Indian sports. Diaspora playing a role. People who have a very deep appreciation for Indian culture in various countries, they've
the Ramayana, the Buddhism, all that comes
that.
in.
International leaders.
International, yes.
But I think Mann Ki Baat at a different level. I think Dr. Jaishankar talks about this as well. It is also, we also do it in 11 foreign languages. And it is a way for the West or, the global community to understand how you can achieve developmental change at this scale of 1 billion with this kind of diversity. Because the world has only seen the China model. The China model is undemocratic. It completely erases any diversity, any traces of diversity. When they roll out developmental projects, you have no idea what grievances have just been swept under the carpet or just been steamrolled. I recall during a visit to Chengdu, I was passing through this certain part of town where you could very clearly make out that it's a fresh development, completely leveled and a new construction is going to come up. But then you can see traces that, earlier dwellings were
level
just
to the ground.
Level to the ground. So God knows what misery and what human stories have just been, erased there. Then you look at the developmental model of India, right? Of course, that is there's a lot of noise. It is not a straight line. It is not a smooth field. There's all kinds of grievances, all kinds of debates, discussions. But then he's not done it with either in an authoritarian, dictatorial way. He's not done it in a manner where it is always about grievance and hurt. He's done it with positivity, and I think it is a very important example for several other countries that you can achieve development at this scale with this kind of diversity, with this kind of complexity, with a very positive approach.
So when you became CEO of Prasar Bharati, was that one of your pinpoints that okay, this is what I've got to do? So tell me, what was it like to get that mammoth machinery of Prasar Bharati to get it going?
Well, I mean, I will not even claim to have had this level of abstract thought when I stepped in. It was more, okay, here is the job, let me take this on, see what I can do there. Now, luckily for me, before I became the CEO, I was also a part-time board member, so I got to see what was the reality of public television, public radio in India, something that we all grew up with, something that influenced us over the years. And it was very clear that when people say, the UPA decade was a lost decade, this is it can't be any more real than what I saw in Prasar Bharati.
Really?
10 years wasted because no IT, no modernization. This organization was completely living in the past. The past glory of the monopoly era. It had just not prepared itself for the future, or forget the future, even the present.
But it was 20 years of private TV had already happened.
Yes, that is the irony. That is the irony. So when people claim that the UPA decade was a lost decade, it is not an understatement. It is a statement of fact. Because no modernization had happened, no grievances were resolved. Believe me, I had to deal with more than 1,000 court cases. I would get a contempt notice from every godforsaken corner of India because some court somewhere, passed a verdict. Reason being, you had all these HR issues going back to the late 90s, which were not resolved. And there were no IT systems to speak of. Everything was paper-based. So to take that organization, to modernize it, make it competitive in the present era, I think was quite a challenge. And the COVID period also kind of helped in a way because it just forced everyone to change. Because otherwise there's that natural human inertia to change, right? Resistance to change.
So the technocrats were brought in. There's a lot of talk that we should get outside talent and so that this Indian bureaucracy is changed and it's time for bureaucratic reforms and all that. But it's a slothful animal, Indian bureaucracy.
Right.
And especially so in the year before elections when the bureaucracy smells that there could be change in the regime,
Right.
they stop putting into effect government programs and schemes. You would have seen this happening, right? Now that you're a Delhi wala, you know
In
how
fact,
it happens.
It's quite illuminating. It was a learning experience for me to understand how and why the bureaucracy operates in a certain way. And it's not about individuals. I think most of the individuals are professionals, and many of them are people that you can work with at a personal level. I think what happens is collectively the bureaucracy has a certain culture, which I think has been shaped by the kind of compliance rules that we have imposed on them. Be it with the vigilance, be it with RTI, be it with audits. For example, the coal secretary during the UP era, when he's the only one who's gone to jail while everyone else is, the politicians are fine, right? So bureaucracy has a tendency to play it safe because, to them it is a big deal because if their pensions are stopped, it hurts them really badly because they're not making, private sector salaries, right? So that matters a lot to them. So that their natural tendency is to play it safe, and hence they are very cautious. Hence this slothfulness. It's the result of this entire superstructure that has been imposed on the bureaucracy. And so when an outsider comes in, unless you understand this entire setup and you understand the motives, what are the incentives for getting something done, what are the cautions that the red lines that you need to respect, unless you understand all of that, it's very difficult even for a lateral hire to come on day one make a difference or make a change. I think that's a very important learning. And you got to understand the general financial rules, how procurement is done, because discretion has been completely outlawed thanks to CAG, right? So you can't take discretionary decisions. You have to follow process.
So you can't buy a camera, L1, L2 hoga.
Exactly.
Kuch nahi hoga.
And then you can't even do it by diktat.
Huh.
You have to let this system take that decision. It's very important. So to be mindful of these things and to get change done within those constraints is very important. So even if you bring in a lateral, for him to be or her to be effective, this education is very important to understand the rules, the compliances, how decisions are taken within the government system. Second is you got to empower them, because ultimately in the government system what matters are what powers you have been delegated with. If you are unable to exercise administrative powers, if you are unable to exercise financial powers, you are practically toothless. You can write all the notes that you want, you can give all the gyan that you want, it doesn't add up too much.
So when Prime Minister decided to do Mann Ki Baat, it was this conscious decision कि radio पे ही करना है, and many people said that it was just basically replicating what Pandit Nehru had at that time decided, radio पे talking to the people. Why is it only radio? Why is it not television? Why is it not? Of course, you are playing the stream on TV, and there is on social media too. But why didn't he come on camera to do it? Because every day he's speaking in some format or the other. He is speaking to some targeted audience. So why not on TV too?
So, in fact, he talks about it. Why radio? He's elaborated that in one of the episodes, and it's mentioned in the book as well. So he talks about this incident when he was not the chief minister. He was an organizing secretary in the BJP. He's in Himachal, and he had stopped at some roadside tea stall, and where he gets to listen on the radio, breaking news of that period. Then he says it struck me that how important radio is at these remote corners. That's the only way you
even
you
as
get.
CM, community radio was a big initiative by his government.
Right.
Especially there were women who were manning those community radio stations.
Several
I've
of them have
covered
come.
those stories.
Several of them have come up. So radio in that sense to him was the medium with the widest reach geographically, and which is true today. That the geographical reach of radio cannot be matched by anybody else. Once you get into, for example, the tribal pockets of Chhattisgarh or Jharkhand or the Northeast, you don't have private media serving those audiences. right? They're focused on the urban centers and the population centers. That's about it. Who's going to communicate in Chhattisgarhi or, Santhali or Kokborok or, all these various dialects? It's only All India Radio that does that. 100 plus, languages and dialects. So that was the reason why, in his mind, it had to be radio. Secondly, I think radio as a medium, for example, podcasting, right? I think listening has its value. You're not distracted by the visual gimmicks. You're not distracted by, right? You're focused on the message. And I think that is the other reason why, because it's not about, people are not looking at him when they're listening to Mann Ki Baat. They're listening to his substance of what he's saying.
When you had your meetings with him, what was your takeaway? What was the first meeting with Mr. Modi like?
So this is 2011 when he was chief minister, and I was visiting India at that time for a personal visit. And so they asked me if I would like to come to meet him in Gandhinagar, and because my blog was being read and shared at that time. So I go to meet him, and this was at his home office. And what struck me, the first impression is that it was operating like a professional corporate. There were no hangers on, because you typically go to any political office or a ministry, you see all kinds of people hanging around, so much of noise, a lot of distraction.
To me too, the silence is the first thing that I noticed.
You go to his office, it's
Spartan.
Second thing, they give you a time, it's working like clockwork. People are being called in, and they're done, they leave. So it's very predictable. That was the second impression. And the first, one thing that I was, because I had never met a politician ever in my life. That was the first time I was going to meet a politician.
Interesting. Huh.
Of course, I've had people visit my home, but it was different.
No, it's different, yeah.
Different. This is the first time I personally, went to meet a politician. So I didn't know what to do. How am I supposed to greet him? Am I supposed to, touch his feet or... So all this was going on in my head, and then I walk into the room, and he has solved all that. He stood up and he, extended his hand. It made it very easy. I just had to go and shake his hand, and so that was. And then of course we sit, just the two of us, and I realized something, that he's as introverted as I am. So there was that awkward silence. He's waiting for me to talk. I was waiting for him to talk. And then of course, the silence breaks.
He had read your blog.
He was reading my blog. And in fact, that was the trigger for how I got connected with him at that time. Because there was this one incident.
But you weren't blogging only about politics. You were blogging about terrorism, about history, about everything.
Kinds of things.
So that incident you're talking about.
One particular incident, which was the trigger, was, I think this was 2010 or 11, I'm forgetting, 2010 I guess, when Siddharth Varadarajan writes this article saying that, we have no faith in the judicial system in India. The only way we're going to get Modi is we should take it to the International Court of, I think, Criminal Court or Court of Justice, the Rome Statute, or something like that. So I recall writing a blog saying that, this is such a stupid argument. First of all, you've, given a no confidence on Indian judiciary. Second, you want to take Indian matters outside India to, a different platform altogether. Third, India was not even a signatory to Rome Statute, so it doesn't even apply. But you're changing the goalpost now, because you realize that, CBI can't get him, SIT can't get him, Delhi High Court can't get him, Gujarat High Court can't get him. So let's do this kind of thing. And so that particular blog where detailed out, various things, I think that caught their attention, that, nobody had done that kind of analysis. So that was kind of the trigger when I went to meet him. So that first meeting was an interesting learning experience. It became clear to me in his mind that he was clear that he wanted to lead India. And of course, events eventually unfolded.
So that's what made you take that leap of faith after that meeting to leave your job?
Almost, yes.
So was it at that stage after your meeting with him, or that you took that leap of faith and you said, okay, I want to be part of the India story? There are many who, overseas Indians who have that dream that they want to come back to India and they want to work, but the uncertainty of Indian politics, Indian systems is what scares them. But not only did you moved with your children. And I know of many like you who felt that, India's at that stage where they want to do this, this thing. So tell me about people like you who who linked their wagon with what Mr. Modi wanted to do in India?
So, in fact, after I met him on my way back I took the flight from Ahmedabad. I had a stopover in Bombay, and that is when I met Rajesh Jain, and that was the first time we actually spoke about creating a digital platform. And then, of course, I returned back to India in 2012. I joined Rajesh in 2013. By then, he, Kanchan, and others had already created Niti Central, Niti Digital, and then, of course, that's how it all rolled out. So that was a big decision and a very difficult decision, right? Because you had this comfort of being in the West, and to leave that, to come to India, deal with this uncertainty. And India was not an easy place to settle in, right from trying to get a telephone connection to getting your water bill, to, first of all, to find a place to live in. So it's quite challenging.
And this is 21st century, and still it's difficult.
It's still quite challenging. And then the schools, because there's so much of demand, it's so hard to get into a good school, and so all these decisions had to be dealt with. While at the back of mind you have this thing that you got to do something different, and which also meant stepping out of the comfort zone of your corporate career, and I think that was the toughest call to make.
Regrets?
No. Not at all. Not at all.
Okay. You keep going back to the US. The reason I ask is because there are many I know in the US who want to do what you did, but are reticent about the very challenges that you talk about.
Correct. And it's not easy because several of my peers did stay back. Some even went back with their children. And so in my mind, it was always, one thing was very clear. And when I look at the politics in the US, or just life, forget politics, right? Even life, you will always be an outsider. It will never be your land.
Really?
And I was reminded of this quite rudely within the first month of me stepping into the US in 1998. So I had gone as a young techie from Infosys to work on a client project. And so this was a Saturday. I just got my driver's instruction permit. And so the condition in the instruction permit is you're not supposed to drive alone. You should have someone with a driver's license with you. So that day, for some reason, I was driving alone, and I jumped a red light. So I was pulled up by this cop, and the cop then looks at the instruction permit. He figures out I'm an immigrant, and he tells me something which has remained with me to this date. He says that this driver's license is not your right. It's a privilege because you're an immigrant. We can take it away from you any day. And that stayed with me, that this is never going to be my land. It's always going to be I will always be a guest. And that is the reason why I didn't, give up my citizenship as well. I retained my Indian passport.
So this dichotomy is there in many immigrants' minds, When they're there, it's their heart pulls towards back home, and their mind tells them that no, stay here because you've got children, their future, and so there's this constant thing that works. Now, they also are very linked to politics in India. I'm going to come to Mr. Rahul Gandhi's recent visit to the US, where he spoke to Indians out there. And it could be that, he had specific audiences there. But he spoke about an India which, to many of them, it seems that it's gloom and doom now. What he was saying, that in India there's trouble. So you must have heard the speeches. And now the Prime Minister is going to the US. He's probably going to the same areas. So tell me the way Mr. Rahul Gandhi connects with the diaspora and the way Prime Minister Modi connects with the diaspora, the differences.
It goes back to that fundamental difference that I talked about, right? When Prime Minister Modi is connecting with the diaspora or is speaking to an international audience, he's talking about the glass being half full. He's talking about hope, positivity, the change that's possible. He's, in a very visionary way, looking at the future, looking at the present. While if you look at Rahul Gandhi's his entire rhetoric, in fact, the kind of organizations that he chose, the kind of settings that he's participated in, It is all about hurt and grievance and the negativity that this is not happening, that's not happening. India is democracy is dying. This whole false narrative, and that's what he's trying to communicate. So there is that very clear difference. And when I look at the press release that was put up by this organization, which seems to have coordinated most of his events, this Indian American Muslim Council, they've issued this long press release asking the Speaker of the U.S. Congress to disinvite the Prime Minister from giving that joint session address. And that entire press release is replete with lies, things that are not even factual. Like, absolutely ridiculous, preposterous claims that 200 million Indian Muslims are going to be disenfranchised by the CAA. They'll be reduced to a second-class status. I mean, these are things that are complete lies. And Mr. Rahul Gandhi has gone to the US, patronized by these people, to make these arguments. I think it's very unfortunate. It troubles me because you're doing this on a foreign land where you should have been speaking for the entire country, all of India. Instead, you've taken this very, very narrow perspective. And you focused on these fault lines, and you're trying to deepen these fault lines, where the diaspora to you is this activist community which will create disaffection back home. When for all the wrong things about the sedition law, if there is one reason why it should perhaps exist is things like these, where you can't have foreign agents working to create disaffection in India on on topics which are completely baseless.
And if you were to compare Prime Minister Modi, how does he connect so well with the diaspora as compared to the earlier prime ministers also? I've covered several prime ministers, and it was basically prime ministers talking about what is happening back in India or what is their priority with the country that he's visited. But whereas Mr. Modi, what he does is he seems to know the pulse of the diaspora in that particular country. And he talks about them. I mean, we just saw the Australia the event. I mean, that was like massive. And you can expect that, I guess, even in the US now.
Absolutely. In fact, the underlying phenomenon here, because since I've been an immigrant as well, I've been part of the diaspora as well. I recall in 2002 or 2003, I'm forgetting, one of those 2 years. So I was in Chicago, downtown Chicago. The Hilton there is where the VIPs stay. And it was very interesting. So the first day when I landed in Chicago for a conference that week, President George Bush was staying at that Hilton. So right opposite to the Hilton, you had these activists holding, all sorts of placards criticizing the Afghan-Iraq war at that time, abusing President Bush and so on. And they were mostly from one community. 2 days later, at the same Chicago Hilton, you have L.K. Advani, Deputy Prime Minister of India, visiting. He's also staying at the same. And you have the same set of characters protesting on the other side of the street, holding placards, calling him Butcher of India and all kinds of nonsense. And again, they're all from the same community. So, and you see the faces of the cops who were managing that, the disdain, the disgust because of the manner in which these protests were being done. I think what has changed with Mr. Modi is he's given the larger diaspora a sense of pride. When you go to these events, there's immense sense of pride of being an Indian, being of Indian origin, and how India has changed. I think that is what is making his diaspora events so successful and his diaspora connect so strong. Because it is that sense of pride, because all said and done, despite Silicon Valley, despite all these achievers, the Indian community has not had that space within the Western societies as perhaps some of the other immigrant communities have had. It's only in the last decade that it has started to change in a big way. And I think it's primarily because of Mr. Modi's connect.
Yeah, and also the space that a Indian prime ministerial visit to a particular country, the space that occupies in the local media. It never used to. They won't forget about a column space. It never appeared anywhere even in social media, let alone traditional media.
Absolutely. In fact, I recall you would barely get a mention on a Charlie Rose or forget the Meet the Press or any of the Sunday shows. Hardly any presence.
And Musharraf used to get on Meet the Press. he would be there everywhere at UNGA and things like that. Our prime ministers were never there. And you just felt that it's so wrong that in a country like America, instead of giving space to a democratically elected prime minister, you are giving space to a military dictator on your television channels.
In fact, it was quite worse. I recall when 98, when I landed in the US, was when Pokhran 2 happened and sanctions were imposed. And C-SPAN was carrying live of the congressional hearing, the Senate hearings on sanctions on India. And you had this Republican Senator, Jesse Helms, I think is no more now. And testifying was the congressman from New Jersey, who was very well known as an India friend, Stephen Solars.
Yes.
So Jesse Helms has this demeanor which is very, very, I wouldn't call it condescending. Let me put it that way. I wouldn't call it racist. I'll call it condescending. So in a very condescending way, he says, I don't understand what India is up to. What are they thinking? They're shooting themselves in the foot. What do you think if, can we do a regime change? Can we bring the Congress to power?
Imagine.
This is Jesse Helms asking Stephen Solars. And Stephen Solars' reply was amazing. He says, if I know anything about my Indian friends, you try to do that, the protests will not be in front of the Prime Minister's office, they'll be in front of the US Embassy. So you can't even think of, trying to effect
Stephen Solars is a great friend of India. I mean, those of you who haven't read about India-US relations, do read about his contributions and, to demystify this relationship and to put India's point of view in a very honest manner in the US. I think, and also if you recall, the Indian ambassador, the grilling that he had to face on American television after the Pokhran blast. Oh my God, it was brutal, absolutely. Right. But now
to come from there to here,
dramatic
shift. Of course, even the Manmohan Singh government contributed to it as well with the nuclear
deal.
With
the nuclear deal, things changed. Yes,
I won't take that away.
And I think President Obama and George Bush and Dr. Manmohan Singh, and then President Obama and Dr. Manmohan Singh, to a large extent, it's that trickle-down effect. When your president and prime minister get along well and there is a deep admiration, then that kind of... and then you saw that with Trump and Mr. Modi. He was an unknown factor for the Indian bureaucracy.
Not just that, even Obama and Modi as well. Between Obama and Manmohan Singh, if it was about mutual respect, with Obama and Modi, it is about, the humble origins and working their way up. That life story, so similar with both of them. I think that connected, which is why in the first visit itself, you see they bonded very well.
Right.
Strongly.
Correct. Though there was that one awkward speech at Siri Fort in which he said that India should respect its diversity, or to some extent, some strange comment like that was there. But yeah, what do you see now? Because, with the year before elections is really, when almost a lame duck president, and with Biden, nobody knows whether he returns as president or not. To that effect, Prime Minister Modi's visit, what do you think would be the takeaways in this visit that one should focus on?
I think the clear takeaway that is emerging is now the relationship is on a different footing, right? You see, the defense secretary was here, the national security advisor was there. At various levels, India and the US have connected, despite not having had an ambassador for a long time. And the fact that they're going to, announce this joint development of the engines for the aircrafts, the fact that Air India has played this huge order with Boeing, and the president acknowledged that. So India and the US are now connecting at a very different level, both economically, strategically, with Quad, all of these critical emerging technologies. So I think the takeaway is that it is now beyond the election cycles. It's beyond individual leaders. It's basically a convergence of interests and a lot of shared values. Even the history of both India and the US, if you see how these two democracies have evolved, a lot of parallels, a lot of similarities. And of course, their approach to diversity has been that of a melting pot. Our approach to diversity is finding that, centuries-old cultural connect across India. But both these democracies have something to show to the world. And it's a model which is very distinct from the Chinese model. And that is the takeaway. that.
Right. On that note, thank you so much for being part of the podcast. Wishing you a lot of success on your book. Do read it, buy it, read it, and all the best for the future.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching or listening in to this podcast. Do like or subscribe on whichever channel you have seen this or heard this. Namaste.